your mom and I, Tammy and I, went to Australia and New Zealand for most of February, and that was actually not too bad a trip.
Mm-hmm.
I felt all right, and she was feeling all right too, but we knew her surgery for what was hypothetically a relatively treatable cancer was coming up in March, so that was hanging over our heads, although we weren't overwhelmingly worried about it. And then she went and had her surgery, and then we were informed 6 weeks after that, after she had recovered but was still suffering some pain, that the easily treatable and non-dangerous, slow-growing malignancy that we were told she had was, in fact, something fast-growing with something near 100% fatality rate within a year, regardless of treatment.
Mm-hmm. Like brain cancer. Like
yeah, so that was
completely deadly.
We were told that in about 10 minutes, and so when we were just expecting if not a clean bill of health, at least a representation of what we'd already been told. And then she went in to have more invasive surgery, and hypothetically that worked, but it created terrible side effects.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the start of a whole other 6 months long nightmare of trying to deal with surgical complications, which we did eventually resolve, but not until the middle of August. In fact, literally not until the day of our 30th wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
So that was all hair-raising and stressful, to say the least. I mean, you and I have talked about that, but we seemed to have a life-threatening emergency on Tammy's part for about every 3 days for about 6 months. And then I had my own problems start to develop really with any degree of severity in about April, May, something like that. I had been taking benzodiazepines since 2016.
So why, before we get into that,
yeah.
why did you start taking benzodiazepines?
Well, in over the Christmas vacation in 2016, you and I and Julian and my son and Tammy went out to Vancouver Island to visit her parents and siblings. And when we were there, you and I and Andre, your husband, ate something that didn't agree with any of us and
Sulfites.
Had a very severe reaction to that.
I'm still on board. It was sodium
that seems to be the most
metabisulfite.
logical conclusion, but I was, the same. We had the same symptoms. I don't know if I was any more seriously affected than you or not, but I was freezing cold for about a month. I couldn't get warm no matter how much I wore. I couldn't stand up without fainting. I couldn't sleep. I don't think I slept at all for something on the order of 3 weeks.
Yeah, people like you went on Joe Rogan and talked about a sulfite reaction you had and how you didn't sleep, and people commented that, oh, it's not possible to stay awake for that long. But if you actually look into sodium metabisulfite allergies, the symptoms that we experienced aren't unheard of. There are papers.
Well, it's also impossible to stay awake voluntarily that long. That's not the same as not being able to sleep. Those are very, very different things. Whatever. It's possible that when I was laying there thinking I wasn't sleeping, that now and then I drifted off and would wake up and not notice. I mean, I can't eliminate that as a possibility, but I can certainly tell you that I slept little enough so that it was exceedingly unpleasant. It's a very long time to stay awake. And when we went back to Toronto, our family physician prescribed benzodiazepines, which are often used as a sleeping aid and an anti-anxiety medication, and something called Zopiclone, Imovane. And I hardly took the Imovane at all, maybe 4 or 5 times. But I took the benzodiazepine the way that it was prescribed, twice a day, 0.25 milligrams. And that seemed to bring the symptoms to a pretty rapid halt, which is also part of the reason I didn't need the Imovane. And then there were so many other things going on around me at that time that I never really thought about it again. You know, I thought that it was a relatively harmless drug. and I was taking it in a prescribed fashion at not too high a dose. And I developed symptoms that I now recognized were associated with its use. Weakness on my left side, and like a feeling of detachment from people around me, people I loved, some decrease in the ability to experience joy. But it wasn't until much later that I actually associated with the benzodiazepine use.
Yeah.
When your mom got so sick, my anxiety levels had been climbing up again.
Well, yeah, that was unbearable. I mean, the response I had, if you're told your parent or your wife of almost 30 years has no chance and is going to be dead in the next 10 months. That's what we were told. That
Yes.
surgery doesn't help and that chemo doesn't help and that this is a fast-growing cancer and you're screwed no matter what.
Right.
That's what we heard in one day. So
Right.
yeah, anxiety.
Well, then we went all over North America, to New York and to Houston and to LA, looking for different opinions before we decided to settle on surgery. But
and everyone gave us the same opinion.
yes, which was that nothing is going to help, but surgery was probably the best low probability bet.
Yeah. So
I asked my doctor to increase the benzodiazepine dose, but what seemed to happen as a consequence of that was that I just got more anxious. So again, in retrospect, it seems like I had a rather uncommon but not unheard of reaction to benzodiazepines, where increased dose makes anxiety worse instead of better. So then at one point when things weren't getting better and Tammy was still in the hospital and I was trying to take care of her, we had lots of help. I stopped taking them entirely and tried ketamine, which is a treatment for depression. Well, neither of those were a very good idea as it turned out. So I had to stop taking benzodiazepines entirely to take the ketamine.
Oh, yeah.
Then I stayed off them for something approximating a week.
It was a week.
Not knowing that was a very bad idea. And I often think I should have known these things because I did a lot of scientific research when I was a graduate student on alcoholism. And I knew that alcohol and benzodiazepines and barbiturates were all the same chemical class, at least in terms of their effect on neurological effects. But what I knew about benzodiazepines was that they were comparatively safe compared to barbiturates, which they basically replaced. But that's much less true than everybody who's taking them hopes. And they're very widely prescribed. And I don't remember what the probability of developing a dependency on them is if you take them for more than 2 weeks. It's 50%, I believe.
It's something like 50%.
Yeah, if you take them for 2 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and over 4 weeks, it's much, much higher.
Right.
And most people prescribe them, stay on them for life. And that could have something to do with the fact that they're very difficult to get off of.
Yeah, well, it was unbelievably unpleasant. I mean, it was unbearably unpleasant. And so I started tapering off when Tammy was in the hospital, but I couldn't push that too fast because it wasn't bearable.
And what do you mean it wasn't
bearable? My anxiety levels went higher than anything I'd ever experienced. And I also developed this condition called akathisia. And the best way I can describe that is that it was like being jabbed with something, with a prod, like a cattle prod, something electric or something sharp, nonstop for hours, for all the hours I was awake. It was absolutely, I couldn't sit or lay down or stop moving. And even if I did get up and move, it wasn't like that made it better. I just couldn't stop doing it. It was horrible. Akathisia is horrible. It's like being whipped. That's another way of thinking about it. Although I really think I would have, sounds melodramatic, but I think if I had to pick whipping or akathisia, I suppose it would depend on how big a whip. But
maybe not one of those.
It wouldn't be an obvious choice.
Those 5-pronged whips.
Yes. Yeah. Cat of nine tails, that might be worse. But it was plenty bad.
Yeah.
And things just fell apart more and more. Tammy recovered rather miraculously in the middle of August. But I continued my sort of downhill spiral and ended up in a clinic on the Eastern Seaboard that claimed they could do a rapid